Part 3 video of 9.5 equations. Last equation to solve. We got a couple restriction problems at the end to show you to give you a little good news as far as the quiz goes. So this one looks nasty, and it is. But the thing you have to remember, guys, is anytime there's a bunch of plus or minuses, you see a d squared, you got to look for factoring first no matter what. First thing I would look at is say, hey, I don't see any GCFs in here, but that middle guy, that d squared minus 3d minus 18, that's probably going to factor. So some more advice for you. I finally left myself with a bunch of room for this problem to do in this video. When you're doing these problems, I would spread them out because we have to throw stuff in later to make them match. So the bottom, d squared, d and d, 18, 6, and 3. I would need 1 minus 1 plus to get that to work out. 2 on top. All right, now this one on the end. So take a look at the denominator. The middle guy now has a d minus 6, but the last guy has a 6 minus d. They're not the same. We did pull this trick earlier. If you multiply that denominator by -1, that would just flip the signs around. So what would happen to this positive 6? He would become negative. What happens to this negative d? He would become positive. And he does match. The thing that you got to remember is if you multiply the bottom by -1, better multiply the top by -1 as well. All right, so that's factoring's done. The factoring helps us determine whether the denominators match or not and what we need to do to them to actually make them match. So I would start off by saying this. The last one has a d minus 6. The middle one has a d minus 6. The first one does not have a d minus 6. So I would put that there to start working my common denominators. The first one has a d plus 3. The second one has a d plus 3. The third one does not have a d plus 3. But he does now. So now the denominators match and we can ignore them. But without the parentheses, without the factoring, it would have been really hard to determine that. So when in doubt, factor it out. Factoring is always a good idea. So all I have to do is clean up the top. I have 1 times d minus 6. The middle one we never messed with. And now the one on the end. So be careful, right? So there was a minus sign already in the problem. And now we have a -1 on top. So 2 negatives in a row makes a plus. So +1 instead. And yeah, you could have skipped a step, right? Because 1 times something isn't going to change it at all. I have a d minus 6. I have my 2. Distribute that guy out. I got d plus 3. So one cleanup issue I can do here. I can add my 2 and my 3, and I got 5. So hopefully you're noticing already something weird's going to happen here. I got to eventually move the d's to one side regardless. But if I do that, what happens to the d's? They cancel. Left with a -6, I'm left with a 5. But the d's gone. Kind of hard for you to tell me what d equals if the d has disappeared completely. So you're going to say to yourself, man, I just did a whole lot of work to determine this answer. And I would say to you, yes, that's the only way you can find out that the d was going to cancel, and the only way that you could know -6 does not equal 5, and we learned way back that a false statement at the end means no solution. So there is no d that's possible to plug into that problem to make it work in the first place, but unfortunately for you, you have to go through all that work to find that out. So one of my famous sayings, right? Well, life's tough, get used to it. All right, so let's make, speaking of life tough, so that was a tough problem for sure, but I do have something that I like putting on the quizzes that's a little bit easier to do, and I do it for 2 reasons. Number 1, name all the restrictions. Okay, well, it's obviously important that we know what the restrictions are, because if you get that answer for a problem that you do, that's a no-no. You can't have a restriction. And coming up in the other half of this section, the inequality section, you have to use restrictions for the inequalities no matter what. And the other reason I like putting these on there is because they're way easier. So I'm not asking you to solve the problem. Do not solve them. Just tell me what the restrictions are. So for the first one, you just need to tell me what number minus 9 would be 0. Well, 9's a restriction. If I plug 9 in there, I can't have 0 on the bottom. What number plus 2 is 0? Negative 2 is. So negative 2 is a restriction. So good news, right? All we have to do is switch signs. Switch signs gives us zeros on the bottom. Problem number 2. Let me point out this guy first, right here. That guy right there is understood to be over 1, which means he's on top. If he's on the top, he's not a restriction. A restriction has to do with the bottom numbers. So I completely ignore that guy if I want. So I'm going to tackle this one first. If I literally put a 0 in place of x, it would say 8 over 0. That's a no-no. So 0 is a restriction. Do you guys remember this little trick? If the 3 is not there, it would say x minus 2, and you would tell me 2. But the 3 is there. So since there are two numbers, we make a fraction, which is, in fact, two numbers. So if you forgot that trick, please recommit it to memory. So only one number, like the previous problem. This guy said r plus 2, one number. Switch the sign, done. This guy said r minus 9, one number. Switch the sign, done. This guy has two numbers. Please make a fraction out of it. So for this last problem, can you tell by looking at that nasty problem what numbers you cannot stick in for y? Well, if you factor first, you can know for sure, because if you see the factor and you see the parentheses, if you see the parentheses, it makes it way easier. So when in doubt, factor it out. Y squared minus 16, that's called a difference of two squares. That one's not too bad. Y and y, minus and plus, 4 times 4 is 16. So we can go ahead and write those down if you want. You could use the plus minus symbol as well. So I cannot use 4 or negative 4 for my answers. Now again, this guy in the middle, check him out. Where's that y at? He's on top. I don't get restrictions from the top, so I can ignore him. There's no y on the bottom of that one. This other guy, does he have a GCF? No. If he doesn't have a GCF, this is how we factored stuff. 2y squared, well, it's got to be 2y and y. Couple different ways to get 20. So what's one way to get 20? Well, 1 times 20 would be one possibility. You got 2 times 10, 4 times 5. So this is the one, it's just a matter of trial and error. If I go with negative 5, positive 4, and if you take the time to check it, remember how to check them, outside, inside, I'm going to tell you right now that you're going to get that positive 3 in the middle, therefore must be the correct factoring. So this guy's restriction will be negative 4, but we already wrote it down. You could write it again if you wanted to. No point in doing it. So here's what does worry me. The other set of parentheses has two numbers in it. Two numbers make a fraction, which coincidentally has two numbers. And there you go. There's all your restrictions. So not problems to solve. There will be a couple of these on a quiz where all you have to do is name the restrictions. First problem did not require factoring. Second problem did not require factoring. Third problem did. And let me just point out, none of these three problems had this guy. But you do know that's a possibility from time to time, so be aware of him. All right, guys, thanks for watching part 3. That concludes the videos for section 9.5 equations. Thanks for watching.